Historically speaking, American sports outside of basketball haven't had much success spreading east of the Atlantic Ocean. But as soon as baseball was introduced in Seoul at the turn of the 20th century, it became woven into the fabric of Korea's DNA. When South Korea became its own country just after World War II, the game continued to swell in popularity as it became recognized as the country's national pastime. Now the nation has made the game its own, and as the MLB continues to decrease in popularity in America, the much more vibrant version of the sport is thriving in Korea. While the Korean Baseball Organization faces challenges such as limited accessibility to the game for kids, increased competition from the ever-growing K-League, and of course, financial setbacks brought on by the coronavirus, the game has entered a new era as it becomes more visible internationally. So the question is, are those setbacks too big to overcome, or is the future brighter than ever for baseball in Korea? Welcome and thank you for tuning into Season 1, Episode 5 of Growing the Game, where each week I talk to a new guest about the development of a particular sport in a particular country. This week, I am elated to bring on Dan Kurtz, the founder of MyKBO.net, which has been providing English coverage of the KBO League for the last 17 years. He's one of the most terrific people you'll ever meet and is such an incredible resource on all things Korean baseball. So definitely give him a follow at MyKBO on Twitter and check out his website. It's all great stuff. Dan, 안녕하세요. Thank you so much for joining me today.
안녕하세요, Zach. Thank you for having me on. It's an honor to, come on anybody's podcast and talk about Korean baseball in Korea and just sports in general.
Absolutely. I really appreciate it. And, like I said, like you were the name that I circled on my list as soon as I was starting this podcast. So I feel like I really landed the big fish here.
Well, wow. I'm a little nervous now, but thank you. I'm honored for that to even, for me to be on somebody's list to begin with, let alone at the top. So hopefully I am able to fulfill all your expectations.
Yes, all the pressure's on you now. Don't worry. No, but I kind of want to get started. So talking a little bit about the history of the game in Korea, and then we can kind of move into what's going on now. And there's a lot going on now, obviously. So I don't know, if you're like historian level, about baseball in the country, but I do want to just kind of address the key turning points that kind of increase the popularity of the game over time. And if you have anything to add or anything I'm missing here, or any comments on how certain things affected, I would love to hear your input. But before I get into that, I'd like to just start with your background. So could you just tell me where you from and where'd you grow up?
Sure. I was adopted from South Korea, so thus why I have a little bit more affinity towards the Korean Baseball Organization.
Mm-hmm.
That is one of the reasons why I got into that. When I went back for my first trip back when I was in college to Korea, first time I had been back since I was adopted from there at age 3 months. So my whole life, 20 years, and then popped up, found out they had a professional baseball league, and I'm like, okay, this is something I gotta learn more about because I love all sports, whether it's just baseball. Any country I go to visit, I try to go to their professional sports league. And so, side note, I took my wife on our honeymoon, and we went to Ireland, and we stayed in bed and breakfast and all that kind of stuff. And then, of course, I took her to a professional Irish soccer game on our honeymoon. I was like, I have no idea who's playing or anything. I just it's a professional sport. I gotta go see it. So that's what I try to do in every country that I visit, no matter where. And so, because it's always fun learning about a new country, learning about their sporting culture. And so in Korea, it's been the last 20 years now that I've been following the league. It's just been a true learning experience. But I myself, like I said, was adopted at the age of 3 months. And I grew up most of my time in eastern Pennsylvania. Grew up in Lancaster County, home of the Amish people. I grew up a Philadelphia Phillies fan, Philadelphia 76ers fan, Villanova basketball. For football, though, I went down to Arizona, so I'm an Arizona Cardinals fan for the NFL. That's a different story, but they're doing okay this season. So it's a
Yeah.
little, it's kind of exciting for me as a football fan. But yeah, it is. I'm a sports fan. I like all sports, and it just so happens to be that baseball is was one of my first sports that I ended up liking, and then it just so happens to be that it is Korea's basically national pastime as well, not just America's national pastime. It is Korea's,
Right.
and it is a great sport that I enjoy watching as a fan, and I enjoy watching the differences and similarities between various countries. So I like watching the KBO to see how it's different, how it's the same, and stuff like that.
Hmm. So you got in Williamsport in Pennsylvania, right? So like,
Yes.
what's the baseball community like in Pennsylvania? When were you first introduced or exposed to the game?
Sure. So the funny thing is, my family is not a big pro sports loving family. We do sports. We ski. We play golf. We do intramurals. We would do that, but nothing that we're joining teams and like AAU basketball or even Little League. I just played baseball in my backyard. Ended up loving it. So I was born in 1979. So 1987, I think, is when I first started to fall in love with baseball. They were like the only channel. We didn't have cable. It was like the only channel our little rabbit ear TV would pick up would be the local channel that carried the Phillies. Grew up, knew that Mike Schmidt was the hero to the area. So I grew up liking Mike Schmidt, even though it was towards the end of his career. And then, of course, I got into baseball cards at that same time. So baseball cards helped fuel that passion. And then it just happened before we moved to Lancaster, I was living in Berks County, and they had a AA team there, or they still do, called the Reading Phillies, an affiliate, AA team of the Philadelphia Phillies. So my family would take me out to those games. They would drop me off with some family friends to go to the games because my family didn't want to go to the games all the time. My mom would bring a book to watch a baseball game. So, I mean, they were kind enough. They were gracious enough to say, Dan, go do your thing. When I was growing up, I started to love baseball and love the Phillies because of that. And that was just centrally where I grew up. My cousin and I, same age, we ended up playing baseball in our backyard. We'd imitate all the players that we had baseball cards of, or what we saw on TV. But due to the lack of technology at the time in 1987, I mean, it was literally rabbit ears TV. I got the Phillies. If I had another team, maybe then, but everybody in my school and everybody, you got the pressure of where you live. So everybody likes the Phillies. So I'm like, I became a Philadelphia Phillies fan and I followed them ever since. And then once, started learning more about baseball as I got older and then started following the league in general. And then once I went to Korea, started following the KBO. So, I mean, that's generally how I became a baseball fan.
Yeah. So you went to college in Korea? Like, walk me through your return to Korea.
Sure. So growing up, I had never been back to Korea. I didn't know a lot about my Korean ancestry, my roots, basically. I didn't know how to speak Korean. I didn't know anything about Korea. Literally, I knew where it was on a map, and that was it. So I went to college in Lancaster, Millersville University. I was going for broadcasting, and about 2 years in, I just got tired because it was in my hometown, and I just like, I need to do something. And it popped up that my parents were gracious enough to say, hey, would you like to go on a cultural tour of your home country where you were born? They sponsored me to go, and I said, all right, I'll go. And so basically in that 2-week tour, it was with me and a bunch of other Korean adoptees from all over the world, mostly North America,
Wow.
that went over, and it was all our first time back to South Korea. So there's various
Wow.
ages. I was in the middle there because I'm a college. So I was one of the younger ones actually because I was a college kid then. And during those 2 weeks or 10 to 14 days, it was just a whirlwind tour of the country of Korea. Saw all the tourist highlights. Got to see where my orphanage was, stuff like that. But it was on one long bus ride back to the hotel is at the end of the day. And all I do is remember hearing the tour guide pop on the microphone over the bus and say, look over to your right. You know how they do that. And they're like, go to the left. Look over to your right. There is the Olympic stadiums where they had the 1988 Olympics. And right now it looks like there's a baseball game going on. And I said, what? And they're like, they have a professional baseball league in South Korea. I knew none of that. I mean, it was 1999 when I went back there. So the internet was just starting out. It wasn't something that I jumped on the internet. I had tons of other stuff going on in my life at the time. And I'm like, maybe I knew that baseball was played outside of North America maybe I didn't. My ignorance just did not lead me
Right.
to think that there was a professional baseball league in South Korea. So I was like, what? There is? That's awesome. But because of the lack of resources at the time, I didn't really look too much further into it. But that trip did lead me to want to go return the following year because I was getting tired of just being in my hometown. I was like, I got to go study abroad. So I studied abroad for 1 year at Yonsei University. And it was at that time that at Yonsei that I started learning the Korean language, learning the culture. And within the first month that I was there, one of my first friends that I met there, he was also a sports fan. And he's like, you got to come out to a professional baseball game. I said, I'm going. And that's when I went to my first KBO baseball game. And I've been hooked ever since because of the fans, the atmosphere, the game on the field. Everything got me just so excited. And I was like, I got to learn more about this. And due to the lack of English language resources about the league at the time, and even still until this year, I decided to try to help out others, maybe learn as I am learning about the league itself. So as I'm learning about the league, I'm also putting it on like a message board at the time and just trying to help others answer things. And my very basic Korean skills were just like, being put to use. And I figured, hey, why not put two and two together? So at least, I'm learning the language and doing something that I like, which is pro sports and baseball. So I coupled that together to make it into the website that it is now. And now 20 years later, here we are in 2020, a pandemic. We had natural disasters, everything going on. And I can sit at my house in the middle of the night, turn on ESPN and watch KBO baseball, which has just been mind blowing to me.
Yeah, yeah, I imagine that's just absolutely crazy to see, from the early beginnings, from when you first were introduced to the KBO to being able to flip on ESPN and see games. I mean, that's just crazy.
It's mind blowing to see the announcers that I grew up watching MLB baseball games being broadcast with now talking about KBO baseball and the players themselves, let alone the country of Korea, the culture, and like the league's only been around. You want to talk about the history of the league has only been around since 1982 as a whole. That's a professional league, very young league when you compare it to the Major League Baseball. So, to have that growth of that it's had, because now it started out with 6 teams and it went to 8 teams. Now there's 10 teams, and that's probably about the most teams that the league's going to have. But those 10 teams have been very competitive, and they put on a good product. And the fan interest in South Korea itself has increased every single year, basically. It's plateaued a little bit in the last couple of years, and now 2020 happened, and obviously that just put a wreck on everything. Interest has obviously shown increased abroad because of that. So the bad part was no fans in the stadium for the teams to make money on, but they have more eyes on them, the league itself, than they've ever had before from outside of Korea, which is, I think, as being a Korean American adoptee, I think is pretty cool. But I know teams are just like, well, unfortunately, they're not making a lot of money from these new international viewers as much as they wish they could, because my goal would be that my dream is they're like, everybody's like, well, what would you like to see? I was like, everybody that's tuning in to watch a game is missing out because there's no fans in the stands, or they can't see this experience for themselves. So whenever the pandemic and travel restrictions are over, I'm encouraging everybody, get on a plane. I know it's easier said than done. Jump on a plane, go to Korea and watch a baseball game, and watch the other pro sports there too. They have leagues for basically every sport, but watch the baseball games and you'll see why it became a passion of mine, just because of how exciting atmosphere it is when you're there at a game.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, that's something that I want to circle back to a little bit later. But you mentioned, kind of going back to the history. So baseball's introduced 1905 to Korea through American missionaries. And they teach it, they taught the game to members of the Hangsong YMCA in Seoul. And then you have that Japanese colonial era from 1910 to 1945. And I think that's possibly, just from the research that I've done, which isn't extensive, but there's kind of like this rise of imperialism and nationalism and sort of rivalries kind of growing between Japan, Korea, and Taiwan was playing baseball as well. So I guess my question is, how do Koreans view the origins of baseball in their country? Or is that not something they really think about as a national pastime? Like,
Sure.
what's the perspective there?
Sure. Like, I mean, if you're a baseball here, it's Abner Doubleday makes baseball here in America, right? Creator. So I don't dive in too deeply. It's going to be very brief, touching on KBO history or baseball history in Korea. Actually,
That's fine. Yeah.
one of my friends, Patrick, is a baseball historian, and he loves doing this stuff. And he's the one that's taught me some of this. You should follow him on Twitter, Korean Baseball History on Twitter. He is great. But basically, what I found out through him is that yes, the general media story is that the YMCA story, American missionaries brought the game over. He was able to dig through some old writings and findings, and actually baseball was being played, a form of baseball was being played before those missionaries landed, about 8 years, I want to say, before that.
Wow.
Maybe 1896, 1897. Don't
Mhm.
have the exact date right off the head. He was able to find reference to it in a brief journal or something that he was
Wow.
able to come upon. And now that's not to say that the missionaries, when they Philip Gillette and came over, I'm sure they just, they played baseball, and then they updated it and, gave them a little more rules, or maybe brought them more supplies to what it is, to what the story is, the main story. Generally, in Korea, the general Koreans, from what I understand, will all fall back to that the missionaries brought it, and the YMCA team. In fact, there is a movie called YMCA, and it is based upon that story, that team. It's kind of a non-fiction fictional movie, uh, about that first baseball team for the YMCA team in Korea, and it goes on and it shows about how it originated there. Now, it's very Hollywood. Well, it's not. It was a Korean movie, so it's not very Hollywood. But yeah,
Right.
they added some embellishments to it.
Yeah.
But yes, that is the general story, and so that's probably generally, if you'd ask a lay person in Korea, just the average citizen, like, hey, how baseball come to, they'd probably say that. My friend Patrick, on the other hand, he will lay out everything for you and say, no, it's been played since 18 so and so, and here's the reference to it and all that, and he has all that information. But speeding up through, yes, the Japanese imperial period, definitely the baseball would take form there. And so after the imperialism, after South Korea became an independent country, they just still didn't have a pro baseball team. Like, they didn't do pro baseball to what we have now in the KBO. So what eventually happened was down the line, before the league, they had semi-pro, basically. What happened? So the KBO League started in 1982, but prior to 1982, they had all these big companies that all their factory workers and all their employees, just like they had semi-pro baseball, basically. I mean, they would go play for them and play for their company. And then finally, all these companies got around together and say, why don't we just make this a full-time job? Because basically our guys are coming to work so that they're coming to play baseball. I mean, it was 1982. The leader of Korea at the time was later to be known as a very strong dictator, but he said, let's make a sports program, basically. We need to make pro sports, basically. And so that's why that helped encourage the start of the KBO. Now, 1982, there were 6 teams. The fans would go to the games. The atmosphere, if you think going to a college football game is a little wild, you should have seen or see some video clips of a KBO baseball game back in the 1980s, early 90s. It is a very it looked to be a dangerous time. Obviously I can only go by off of video clips. The fans, I'll just say, are very passionate at that time. And because of that passion to what it is now, maybe that's where some of the cheering culture that it is currently now has come out with. So now it's not dangerous to go to a game. It's one of the safest places you go. You don't have to worry about opposing fans beating you up or hurling insults at you or anything. Honestly, it's all in good fun. You go, but you got the cheer sections for each team, cheering, battling back and forth, yelling across to each other. It's great fun. But in the early 80s and 90s, when the league was just starting out, it was quite an intense time. I mean, the rivalries, we talk about, like the Red Sox, Yankees. I mean, yeah, the Kia Tigers, the Haiti Tigers, they had their bus burnt by fans. Their team bus blew
Wow.
up, basically burnt
Wow.
because of some rival fans. that went on to do stuff. And then, again, it wasn't all just because of stuff that happened on the baseball field. There's a lot of also like regional politics came into it and stuff like that. But nowadays it's mostly strictly baseball, baseball on the field, and rivalries that take place because, again, regional rivalries, but because the teams don't go by their city names, you go by company names. Right. But yes, there still is some rivalry, and in fact, a funny rivalry that everybody knows is Samsung Electronics. Like, my phone is a Samsung phone, and then LG. They're obviously rivals in electronics. They're also rivals in baseball. Right. I remember one of my friends in Korea saying that for the longest time, they used to be such big rivals. They wouldn't have anything. I think it's softened over the years, but they wouldn't do any sort of business or do any kind of baseball. They weren't basically baseball friendly to each other. They're rivals. And I think that's great. I mean, I love a great rivalry. So there's also regional rivalries in the KBO. So it's just interesting to see how baseball in Korea has gone from, like you said, we'll just generally say the missionaries, or even a little bit before then, in the early turn of the century, 1900s, Japanese imperialism. The country gets independent. They start doing semi-pro baseball, basically industrial league, and now all of a sudden to what it is now. It is 2020, they got to deal with ESPN and they're showing games on TV.
Yeah. It's wild. Based on my, readings, it seems like that point you mentioned about when South Korea became independent was kind of a turning point, that post-World War II and then into the Cold War, that you had U.S. troops stationed there playing and teaching the game to those who didn't know it, and then just playing with the ones who already knew it. And then you just kind of saw it kind of creep in. Even just before there became the professional league, you had it kind of seeping into high schools and universities, and then into the KBO. And then you've got, I think, maybe what some people believe is, the biggest turning point was probably in the late 1990s with Park Chan-ho. The first Korean player in the MLB kind of became a national hero.
Not just kinda. He is a national hero. So the last time I lived there was from 2014 to 2016. He's been retired. So he was retired at this point. I go into my local 7-Eleven. They have 7-Eleven there. Go in, and 7-Eleven always carries like the random stuff over there. And so I was looking and I'm like, oh, here's a cologne, number 61. Chan-Ho Park cologne. I'm like, okay, they're still selling Chan-Ho Park stuff in 2014, 2015, 5 years ago. So just to show you how big of a legend and how big he is there to the sporting community in Korea, and not even the sporting community. He is a name that even if you don't like sports, you're somebody like maybe my parents, they weren't a big pro sports fans, but if they were living in Korea, you would know who Chan-Ho Park is. My mother-in-law, who is Korean, she doesn't know sports at all. But she knows who Chan-Ho Park is.
Kind of she knows Michael Jordan, LeBron James. Everyone knows the name.
He breaks through. He was not only just a celebrity, but they took great pride in him being the first professional Korean baseball player, athlete to go abroad like that and have success, and then have a large, it didn't turn out great when he went to Texas, but I mean, he got a large sum of money. It was deal after deal. So it was just amazing for me to see. Even like I said, I knew he was big and I knew he was on the Phillies. I loved it. I got a Chan-Ho Park jersey. I got all this stuff. But then it wasn't until, like I said, I lived there again. I lived back and forth between then. But after he retired, and then I got to go there, and then I saw I was like, wow, they're still selling Chan-Ho Park like merchandise stuff. And he was like a spokesperson for the Hanwha life insurance. I mean, he's still a commodity there because he's such a legend. And honestly, not just a baseball legend, not just a sporting legend, he is up there in the realm of like popularity. Like, you can just show him and they're like, that's Chan-Ho Park. I know who he is, even if I don't watch baseball. And so it's pretty amazing to see how that just overcame and the prideful of the country was of him.
Exactly. And I'm interested in like the economic aspect of it, because around the time he was rising to prominence, you had that severe national economic crisis between 1997 and 2001.
Yes, and the IMF.
I'm guessing that he was kind of like the bright light, or maybe the escape that away from those economic problems, or something along those lines.
Well, also I asked my friends because I was like, well, obviously the Koreans that lived in the United States saw a had a different experience because it was like, wow, there's a Korean person that's playing professional baseball here in America. This is awesome for us. For them, for my friends in Korea that had been growing up in Korea, they're like, yes, it was hard times for a lot of them. It was for their parents. It was the IMF crisis. The economy just tanked down there. Um,
Right.
but they always could turn on their TV, or at least during the baseball season, and the Los Angeles Dodgers baseball games will be generally played in the morning time, like 8 a.m. So, nothing too crazy. You're not waking up at 4 a.m. to, like I am, to watch a KBO baseball game. That you can turn it on 9, 10 o'clock and you'll still have the baseball game. And his games are broadcast on national TV. So, like you said, it might have been just sort of like a little bit of relief from all this stress that they have. My friends just remember them saying, yeah, I just remember his game was always on TV in the morning time when we were at home or something. And I was like, that's awesome, because I couldn't imagine turning on like the TV every morning and then seeing like a Michael Jordan game or
Right.
something to that extent. That's basically what it was like. I was
Yeah.
like, wow, that's truly different. Our recollection as Korean Americans in Korea, in America, we're like, wow, we're so proud of him. He's the first Korean person to put on a baseball uniform, you know, in the MLB. And wow, I'm not a Dodgers fan. I was a Phillies fan, but I still even followed him as much as I could through a baseball, through the baseball sports page or something. I'd be like, wow, there's a Korean guy. That's my country where I'm from. And I wasn't
Right.
even very knowing a lot of the country at that time. I just like, wow, that's very cool that, something
Right.
like that happened. Now, 20 years down the road, look how many different, you have Hyunjin Ryu for the Toronto Blue Jays. You have Kim Kwang-hyun for the St. Louis Cardinals. You have Chushin Su down in Texas. I mean,
Mhm.
who knew? 20 years, he was the trailblazer. And because of that, he is just thought upon as the biggest legend in Korea, sports wise, or not even
Yeah. Yeah.
sports.
So like we talked about the Japanese imperialism up until the basically World War II, and then shortly after that, you kind of saw the economic boom in Korea, like just kind of exploding with the tech
Mm-hmm.
scene and everything like that. And I feel like Korea kind of made baseball its own from that point on. Like it may have had like a because it was just like played by the Japanese and it was
Sure.
maybe kind of seen as almost one of their primary sports. Japan considers it their national pastime as well. But I think like with that boom, like Korea didn't kind of fade away after World War II or just like,
Right.
go to destruction. Like
Right.
it
The
kept
incredible
going.
development in those 50
Yeah.
years. I mean,
Yeah.
if you think about it from 1948 to where it is now it's I mean, the, they have one of the most robust economies, one of the most technologically advanced. I know it sounds like I'm going into the Korean pride thing. Yeah,
But
I
it's
am
true.
prideful
Yeah.
that a country. My mother-in-law is so prideful of how big Korea has become in 60 years, basically.
Right.
Basically, the country was torn apart by a war.
Yes.
It was literally split apart.
Right.
Families lost their family members to war. Family members are in North Korea. Some family members are in South Korea. They can never see each other. The country was in just economic turmoil. Now, out of that turmoil rose, now there various reasons why it rose. It can be some contentious things, right? Why certain companies did and didn't. But you have this Samsungs, you have the LG, you have the Hyundais, you have um, all the companies that you are looking at and using right about now. They're somehow probably involved from South Korea. Kia, I mean, you have all that, and all the companies I just mentioned. Not only the large companies, they also happen to own baseball teams.
Right.
So I think that's maybe what you're getting to. That some of these. So
Yeah.
basically, what happened was in the 80s when the pro league was being started, there was only 6 teams. Some of these teams faded; they actually failed. But then they were highly encouraged that another business take them over. And so the way that the companies were looking at it is that, hey, it's free advertising basically. Um, it's the national pastime. So there's no better place to put your name on something than to be known as, hey, we're the Kia Tigers. We're the Samsung Lions, because, that's our name. Our name's going to be mentioned every time. And so honestly, I don't even refer to the teams as mostly their mascots. Like I won't say, hey, the Lions are taking on the Tigers today. I'll be like,
Right.
Samsung's playing Kia. And
Yeah.
it doesn't even occur to me, or it does, but I don't even think about it when I'm saying like, company names, because if I were to do it here, it'd be like Chevy's playing Ford. I'd be like, okay, that's a little weird because I didn't grow up. But for me, Carrion Baseball is, I know them by their corporate name of who they're owned by. And currently 9 teams are owned by large companies. Only 1 team is truly independent, like we would think of an independent sports franchise. And of course, just to show you the economics of that, even those 9 teams that are owned by large corporations in Korea, some of them have financial problems, meaning that their parent company is maybe having some problems and there might be some turmoil. And I said some teams have folded and been taken over. The one team that is independently owned is always, they're like the Oakland Athletics. They're always pinching for money. They're always looking for ways to just save money, be economical, be the, like Tampa Bay, Oakland of Major League Baseball. They're just trying to think of different ways that they can be successful on the field, but also save some money off the field. And so, because they don't have a large parent company that owns them and that can hand them some money. And now in 2020 with a pandemic going on, basically what's happened is a lot of these parent companies, even up the Samsungs, the Doosan's, the large companies that and think they have a lot of money, they're saying, look, we got to pinch pennies around here, and baseball is unfortunately pro sports, whatever pro sports teams they own, that's going to be one of the first things they might tighten their grip on a little bit more than say, their actual money-making process or something like Samsung might, be like, hey, the baseball team, we might cut back a little bit on some of that money there, and stuff like that, versus let's cut back on making phones. Obviously, pro sports is kind of like a luxury to them over there. People will say that, teams own them for marketing reasons, tax write-offs reasons, whatever reason they own them, they still have to take care of them and pay for them, basically. And so now 2020 with no fans, no income, it's definitely getting tighter for all pro sports across the world, but especially in the KBO.
That's really interesting. And so we've talked a little bit about, the late 90s and everything, but I'm curious about whether or not those 2006 and 2009 World Baseball Classics, Olympic gold medal in 2008, like how much further did that push baseball in front of all the other sports in Korea?
Well, thanks to good point, because prior to the 2006 WBC, when Korea had their incredible run, they lost to Japan in the finals. Before that, the early 2000, 2001, 2002, 2003, fandom attendance was actually plateauing and actually going down. And 2002, you had the joint World Cup with Japan. Soccer was taking a foothold. They did well in the World Cup. They did, incredible. Soccer was all the rage. It still is a very popular sport there. Don't get me wrong. It is still a very popular sport. But the K League was taking off, which is their pro soccer league. The pro soccer players were becoming the stars. And then Korea did well at the WBC. And this was all their pro players, not just major league players, but it had some of the KBO players featured on it. And it's like, holy cow, our league is being featured worldwide. Wow, we can compete with them. Kind of like the World Cup was for the soccer team. Like, hey, our guys can compete with the world. It was like, hey, our guys can compete with the world, and for baseball. And so that's why they're like, okay. Then so there was a big interest slowly started gaining in the KBO, the league itself. All of a sudden, 2008 comes around with the Beijing Olympics. The baseball team won the gold medal. That was the peak. That was just like, boom. They won the gold medal. Everybody was all in on baseball. And because of that gold medal, some of the players that are now in the KBO, some of the rookies, some of the young players, they're called the Beijing kids. Basically, because at that point, there was either, do I play basketball? Do I play soccer? Do I play soccer? Do I play baseball or even basketball? Baseball was all the rage. They're like, I'm playing baseball. So that's where like KT's slugger, Kang Baek-ho, young guy. He's credited. He's one of the Beijing kids, basically, because the reasons why in 2008, why he's playing baseball now in 2020 professionally and being a star in the league. So those international tournaments and the success that Korea has had has fueled the attendance and fanfare for the KBO. And that can actually be seen then. They had a lackluster last couple international tournaments, and the fandom and attendance in the KBO has been slumping a little bit prior to this year.
Right.
And it's been kind of going down. And they almost needed another big WBC run to kind of get that passion back. Now, the pandemic, I don't know what it's going to be like. Say if all of a sudden magically it ends, you can go to the stadium. I think they're going to have sellouts for a while.
So I think national pride plays into the success of the KBO quite a bit. Then, so like if those 2006, 2009, and 2008 Olympics, if those all went differently, maybe Korea wasn't as successful or didn't make as deep of runs, where do you think baseball would be in terms of popularity right now?
Baseball. Okay, let's say 2006 WBC. They didn't make it a championship game. They failed in the first or second round, and then 2008 they might have maybe finished fourth. Baseball, the KBO League, where it is right now, like I said, those kids that are trying to make the decision: do I keep on playing soccer? Do I want to play soccer? Do I want to play basketball? Do I want to play baseball? They might have picked another sport, and it might have gone another way.
Wow.
And so these young players that are exciting and they're keeping the fans around, they wouldn't have been there. Professional baseball would still be there, but Korea has a professional basketball league. It's called the KBO. Nobody talks about it internationally. Nobody really knows about it.
Right.
The KBO, unfortunately, if that would have happened, could have maybe sunk down to that level because, like I said, it was on a downward trend. All of a sudden, 2006 came around to help it pick that fandom back up. If that stuff did not happen on an international level, baseball-wise, I have a feeling that the soccer league and maybe even the basketball league or other sports league would have taken over the audience in Korea. And so with South Korea, with all the large cities, basically, and it's where I lived in Seoul, it's 24 hours. I mean, it's near, for me, I go to New York City, I'm like, what, stuff's closing down? I go to Seoul, nothing's closing down. I'm going, you can go shopping at 4 a.m., 5 a.m. to large malls. And, there's no 2 a.m., close down the bars, close down the restaurants, close down the clubs. Stuff's staying open 24 hours. At least Seoul, because it's the largest city, is a 24-hour city. But then you have other large cities that are very similar, but maybe not as large. And so there's always something going on. And so that the sports leagues have to compete with that. And they can't, and that has to go with some of the economics too, because they can't overprice themselves. Because other people would be like, what? I can just go see a movie. I can just hang out. I can go out with my friends and I don't need to go to a baseball game because I'm just going to the baseball game for entertainment, whether I really am a passionate fan or not. Passionate fans, of course, will still go. But with everything else that's in your backyard, basically, to go to, if I can't make it to a baseball game, I can't make it to a baseball game because I'd rather go do something else because I have millions of other things to do around me.
You mentioned there was kind of a lull in the 2010s. But you also had some of the best players really in Korean history you mentioned Hyunjin Ryu, Shin Chu. So what did their ascension to the MLB and then success, like sustained success at that, what did that do for baseball in terms of like you said, there was kind of a lull. So if not for them, would it have kind of been even worse, or what was their impact on Korean baseball?
So the way that it worked was Chan-ho Park was still in the league, and he's a Major League Baseball player. So of course, major leagues were still popular. KBO at the time, fans were losing interest, basically. Unfortunately, they did not have that same star power that Chan-ho Park did. But then you had guys like Shin-Soo Choo, again, another major league player, but he was different than, say, Hyunjin Ryu because Choo signed as a minor league. He signed as a kid and went to the minor leagues and worked his way up through the major leagues. So they were like, okay, he's a little bit different. Hyunjin Ryu was where it really changed for the KBO and KBO fans and pride of the KBO, because here was Hyunjin Ryu that's decided to stay. Well, he didn't really have any offers to go abroad that I know of when he was signing as a kid. So he got drafted. He played for the Hanwha Eagles, and then then he got posted. He was put out for auction basically, and the Dodgers bid on him, and he went to the Dodgers, and then he just had a very incredible career with the Dodgers, and now he's doing very well for the Toronto Blue Jays. But that's when KBO fans were like, there we go. He's one of our own, basically. He's one. He's not a guy. He's not like a Chu who signed as a minor leaguer, and then they never saw him again until he was in the major leagues. Right. This was somebody that they got to see on their TV year in and year out, get better and better and better, and all of a sudden then he's now the next season they're turning on their TVs in the morning watching him go up against the best best hitters in the world.
Yeah.
And so the more that these KBO guys have come over to the major leagues, such as Hyunjin Ryu and Hyunsoo Kim, Byung-ho Park, and now this year Kim Kwang-hyun, Hwang Jae-gyun, all these guys that have come over, it is a prideful moment for baseball fans in Korea. And as a fan here in America that's a fan of the KBO, I'm actually very prideful of them as well, because I'm just like, see, I knew the league was good. Nobody knew about it, but if they just took some time to learn about the league, you got some legit players. And now that's finally coming true. And now teams are a little bit worried about losing some of their players to the major leagues a little faster than they want to, or they're like, well, we need to get compensated to. I mean, it's not that gotten to that extent yet that they have to worry about mass upheaval of their star players, but they definitely don't want to lose all their star players, because if they were to lose all their star players, they know what it's like in the early 2000s, late 90s of not having enough star players and fan interest just going, I'm not coming to the door. I'm not coming to the stadium. And so then you have empty ballparks, which then if, the companies, no matter how large a company they are, they're just not getting money. They're not going to keep on doing baseball if they're not making any money, whether it's from attendance or TV contracts or something. So, I mean, it's all hand in hand in Korea, just like it is here in pro sports here in North America, but I think it's even more so in Korea. And so KBO definitely needs these guys to keep on going to major leagues to keep that interest. And I don't think they're in any sort of predicament where they're going to have to worry about like 50 guys leaving the league or something. Right. The way that it works is they leave 1 or 2 a year. I think that's still good for the league, as you still have your stars. And then once one star leaves, that means you just have more space for another star to take over.
Yeah, I was interested in that, whole prospect, because it's like one thing to have that visibility. You feel like it would have a positive impact, but then at the same time, there has to be a balance struck, because if you're losing all of your talent, then you're going to be in some real trouble in terms of attracting fans into your own game. So, and also kind of talking about the Dodgers, like, to have the national hero play for the Dodgers, and then Hyunjin Ryu. So is everyone in Korea just a big Dodgers fan?
Currently, yes, they probably have a Dodgers gear, and now they have a Blue Jays hat on because of Hyunjin Ryu. Yeah. So the way that it works is, yes, you walk out onto the street. So me being a Phillies fan, it always perturbed me that whenever I walked out onto the street in Seoul, where I was living at, I never saw too much Phillies gear. It's always Dodgers. Or then you obviously have the Yankees, and you have Boston Red Sox just because of the name brand. They were just it was, those are being worn more for fashion.
Oh,
and even Dodgers is even kind of being worn for fashion now at this point. But yes, there is tons of Dodgers gear there. And now when Jung-ho Kang was actually doing well for the Pirates there for that short 2 seasons that's when I was living in Korea. That's when you started seeing more Pittsburgh Pirates hat being worn.
Are we seeing some Cardinal support now? Or
I think so. I'm not living in Korea, so I'm not walking on the street every day to pick out. But I bet I know there's an increase in Blue Jay stuff because of Hyunjin Ryu. And my assumption is definitely with the Cardinals as well, there's probably an uptick. The one thing, not only just as a Phillies fan, but then as a KBO fan, that always struck me funny was up until when I first started watching the league in the early 2000s, you never saw any fan outside of the stadium wearing their gear. Like, you might see them wearing a Dodgers hat on the street, going shopping late at night, going out to the club.
Right.
But you wouldn't see them wearing a Doosan Bears hat. You wouldn't see them wearing SK Wyverns or Kia Tiger stuff outside of the stadium. They would they'd wear it at the game, then they'd throw it in their backpack and be done and not wear it. So the last time I went around, though, in 2014 to 2016, when I was living there, I actually saw a little bit of an increase where I was like, hey, it's not just all MLB or other sports gear being worn. There's actually KBO gear being worn on the streets. Still, it's not as common as seeing a Dodgers hat. For every 5 Dodgers hat you might see, or MLB hat, you might see 1 KBO product, being worn. Right. So it's still, they're still behind that. But the way my friends that grew up in Korea see it is MLB is more seen as it's the thing. It actually has there's an MLB fashion brand in Korea and actually abroad there in Asia. Really? And they make, it's way different than what we have here on MLB Shop. I mean, they're making different colored MLB fashion shirts and polo shirts and dress shirts and stuff like that.
Right.
It's an actual fashion line, and that's how they see it. Kind of, it's like a luxury fashion line to them. Whereas, like, if I wear a KBO stuff, you're like, yeah, you're kind of that means you're like a pretty hardcore fan if you're wearing it outside. It's not seen as like a fashion statement in a good way. It's seen as like a fashion statement. It's like, okay, yeah, I guess you really like the Doosan Bears, huh? Yep. So like, you don't see a lot of like, I would wear my KBO jerseys out in Korea and then be like, oh, you like the team? Yep. And nobody else is wearing it if they're not going to the game. They're like, because they'd always ask, like, are you going to the game? I'm like, no. I'm just out. I'm out picking up my food. It's like game time. And like, you're not going down to the state. No, I'm just out shopping. No, I'm not going to. Why are you wearing it? Why are you wearing that KBO jersey? Like, they're thinking, it was like, you must wear the jersey when you're at the game. That's changing. The younger generation's starting to wear it more. But yeah, it still has that. It's still lagging behind that coolness factor of MLB stuff. And like the Dodgers, like the coolness factor of like a Dodgers hat is definitely going to overtake a KBO team.
Yeah. So the KBO is they're responsible for obviously the league, but also it's the national governing body. Is that correct?
Sure. So yes, the KBO organization is, so the way that it goes down is called the Korea Baseball Organization. That's actually like the governing body, but when they made the league, they didn't think of it at the time. They just named their league also the KBO.
Okay, so it's
like they named it after. Yeah, it's two separate entities, and then they came up with now it's known as the KBO League. The actual official name is the KBO League, and then the KBO, the office of the KBO basically is the one that's helping run like the national team. And so they are the ones that are picking the national manager, and then that manager will pick the national team players. But yes, they are the ones that are basically overseeing that part of the national team.
Yeah.
For the adult national team, which is the high level, the competition, the WBC and the Olympic.
Right. Now, are they also typically, the federations are responsible for trying to grow the actual game and maybe increase youth participation? Is that something that the KBO Federation are you seeing any initiatives? Is that a priority, or is it more like, no, baseball's kind of already made it. It doesn't really need a whole lot of investment. Kids are already playing it, pick up baseball or whatever. Like, what do you see in that regard?
So the KBO as an organization has been trying to get the game of baseball more accessible to the youth. So believe it or not, in all of South Korea, there's only about 60 to 70 high school baseball teams that play baseball.
Really?
And so that is also why the talent pool is so thin for the KBO League itself. And that's why there's only 10 teams, because like I said, if they stretch it to 12 teams, that talent pool would be very, very thin because you're not drafting every player that's playing high school baseball. So basically 60 to 70 high schools are only playing baseball during the season. And so that's very few players to pick from for the pro league. So the league figures, well, we have to increase our talent level, but the only way to increase that is if we start, getting better, helping out some of these schools with some of the instruction and some of the actual like baseball equipment and stuff like that. So throughout the year, you will see the league have like, hey, a percentage of this, or we're going to make a donation to this, or one of the local teams, they really put it onto the team in that region to help out the local baseball teams in that region. And so to try to play that out in the KBO, they have two drafts. They have a rookie draft. This is open to anybody and they can teams can draft from anywhere. And then they have a regional draft. And in that regional draft is teams from a certain region are only allowed to draft one player from that certain region. And the reason for that is to try to help that infrastructure for that area where you're from. So that is during the league, the KBO, the foundation or the organization itself is trying to encourage the teams to help their local high school teams out by building up the infrastructure. So if you have a good infrastructure around you, then you're going to build you some prospects. And then of course, when you come to the territorial regional draft, you're going to pick one of those players from your local high school that is, one of the top prospects, because you help put money back into that system. It's actually quite a smart idea as to way to put the onus on the teams, like being like, hey, if you want to have a top player from your region, then you're going to have to invest something rather than just, your lip talk. You're going to actually have to put money down and try to help us out. And so you see some teams are better at it than others. Obviously the teams that get sold, the largest city, and the way it's split up, LG Twins, Doosan Bears, and the Kiwoom Heroes, it's a little bit unfair because like they have such a large population to choose from compared to somebody like the Hanwha Eagles who play in the city of Daejeon, and they are only in that same the few schools that play in that area, and that's all they're allowed to choose from. But that's why some of these regional teams have to then really give a lot of money to those smaller schools and smaller stuff. They, or that's why they should, basically. And that's what the league is saying. You guys should really help this out so that they can become a powerhouse team and a powerhouse prospect so you guys can draft them.
Right. Why do you think that there is only 60 to 70 schools playing? Is it a product of maybe population density, or like there's just not enough room for fields? Like what, or is it a financial issue? Like
a little bit of all that. Population density plays a lot, because like nowadays you will see that the villages where schools, like literally there'll be schools that just, high schools just shut down. Elementary schools just shutting down because the only people that live there are elderly people, because everybody moved to where the jobs are, and all the jobs are in the suburbs and or cities. And so that then takes out the equation of some random, country schools being good at baseball because there's no kids playing baseball.
Right.
Another thing is because it costs a lot of money to keep up your baseball. And then basically these baseball schools, as I call them baseball schools, they're kind of like baseball factories. So you're not doing a lot of studying when you go to a baseball school. I'll just put it that way. You are playing baseball because you're there to play baseball. If that's what you're going for, if you're playing baseball. I'm not saying the rest of the school is being, sorry, not to degrade any of the baseball powerhouse baseball schools education-wise, but if you are a baseball player at some of the powerhouse schools in Korea, your job is to play baseball.
Okay.
And it's almost like a job that you're not getting paid at because they are a powerful powerhouse. And then it's kind of like, I mean, it's honestly, it sounds bad, but then you look at here in America and you look at those high schools, you look at the AAU teams, you look at the private, what was it when I was growing up? Oak Hill Academy. It's a private school, but why are you going there to study? No, you're going there to play basketball. Why is LeBron James going to Sierra Canyon down in LA? LeBron James' son. I'm sure it's a good quality education because I've seen the school. My sister-in-law lives right near. It's a beautiful school, but I'm sure, I mean, it just so happens that like all these stars' sons are going to the same school to play basketball. Yeah, I mean, it's basically that too. I mean, so like, if you go to one of the baseball powerhouses in Korea, you're playing baseball and everybody knows it. And so, if you're one of the smaller schools, you can't really do that because you don't have the population, you don't have the players, you can't afford to just have 25 kids of yours only focusing on baseball, and you're like trying to teach your as a school because you're a smaller school. So again, population wise, like I said, conditions, having a baseball field, just the upkeep of actually having a field, or if you don't have your field itself, then you have to go play somewhere else probably, and then pay for the rental of the field and the upkeep and the lights and all that, and spaces at a premium when you're at some of the larger cities and stuff like that. You're not going to have. You have to play in the country. So it's a host of different things as to why the people that play baseball in Korea want to increase that number that plays it. But I did hear from some people that also like, those 60 to 70 schools that play baseball, they're hardcore about it. But like, if you're just a kid, a little league kid, there's not a lot of like, unfortunately right now, or they're trying to make little league or just youth league baseball. Like, I'm not, with no expectations, I'm a 12-year-old. I'm not expecting to be in the KBO, but I just want to go play baseball. There's not a lot of those opportunities right now. They're hoping to make that a little more so that the regular kid can just go play baseball, not the kid that's like eat, drink, sleep baseball all day long, and I want to become a pro baseball player. It's like,
and then
the
you
kids
never
are like,
know if those kids might, blow up and be really good.
well, exactly. And so like right now there's not I mean, they have a little league, but yeah, it's not a lot of like, hey, I just, want to play baseball and I want to, Saturday, like here in the States, Saturday morning, let's go play baseball in the morning and then come home. And that, that's the only time I do baseball, or one day practice a week. Whereas it's like, you don't have that option over there. It's just boom, boom, boom. You're playing baseball. So they're hoping to try to maybe increase that for the more enjoyment, leisure time baseball. And then, like you said, down the road, maybe through that leisure time baseball, you're going to find more prospects that are like, hey, I'm actually pretty good at this. Maybe I should then attend one of the powerhouse baseball schools.
Right. Now, is there college baseball in Korea?
There is college baseball. They just had so KBO just had their draft, but honestly, it was about 70% of the players out of 1,000 players that were picked, about only 20 to 30% were picked from college. So if you're not selected by the time you go out of high school, there's probably a reason. And then, but maybe you're just a late bloomer. So one of the best players right now in the KBO is, his last name's he's Sungbum Na for the NC Dinos. He signed with Scott Boras. He has a chance to come to the major leagues this next year. He graduated college, and so a late bloomer. He wasn't. I guess he wasn't one of those guys that he just did not get drafted, so he went to college. There's more of those stories maybe that are happening, because you're looking at still a developing teenager. So I mean, like, it's very hard. It goes back then into the just baseball scouting, and they maybe missed a player. And so, yeah, you still get college kids getting drafted, but it's not near as big as the high school baseball scene over there. And so basically high school baseball definitely takes a precedent over college baseball in Korea, but high school baseball in Korea is nowhere near as big as it is in Japan.
Obviously, that just had a massive impact on the KBO being able to expand a little bit internationally, at least in terms of visibility, maybe a little bit of merchandise sales increasing. And that was something that you had been talking about for quite a while. You said that you'd been getting messages from people for years about how to get KBO gear in America. Mm-hmm. And then finally, the whole coronavirus situation kind of forced something to be done about that. And so now we've got some merchandise in America that you can purchase. So what are some of the other big changes that you've seen? What's the impact that you've seen of coronavirus on the KBO? Because you've also mentioned it's kind of twofold. Like, yeah, it's hitting teams hard right now because, the economic side of things, but then you have the global growth as well. So what's the overall impact that you've seen?
Sure. Yeah. The coronavirus, the pandemic obviously has definitely had negatives for everybody in the world. But especially with the KBO, we'll focus on the league itself. Obviously, there's no fans in the stands right now. So that definitely hurts the atmosphere, as well as the economics. Also, the quarantine for some of their foreign players. So every team in the KBO has 3 foreign players. And whenever the foreign players have to come to the league, they would have to do a 2-week quarantine. And so they're usually pre-COVID, you would have baseball teams that would sign a minor league. They'd be like, this guy, one of their players is not performing so well, or he got injured during the middle of the season. They have to sign a new guy. Normally, that would be no problem. They could just sign a new guy. He'd be there 3 days later on a plane, doing his work visa, everything, getting physical, everything. Here, this season, 1, minor leagues in the United States are not playing, so less prospects to choose from. 2, if they were to sign a player, they have to sit out for 2 weeks and basically sit in quarantine, literally just do nothing and make sure that they are COVID-free for 2 weeks. And then you're able to do that. So that's why there's been less transactions this year amongst the foreign players. Also, with the negatives of COVID is the just obviously, like I said, the fan atmosphere, but then like just all the different rules that you had to have. And Major League has this too: mask, no cheering. So not only do you not have the joyous fans in the stands, you can't even have the guys giving high fives, or you get a walk-off home run, they get to do distance celebration because of the pandemic. This is everything. I mean, everybody, sports across the world are having to face these difficulties. Now, I'm going to end on the more optimistic, brighter things that you talked about, because due to the pandemic, the KBO has now being seen in places that nobody has seen before. Like due to the deal with the ESPN, there is, a game being broadcast 6 days a week on this worldwide platform. And I see it down on my website on our mykbostats.com, at least, or as our stats site. We've seen growth or hits from every major continent in the world, which has never happened before to us in years past. And so just that simple initial interest in the league has definitely taken people in Korea by surprise. But I, as a fan that's lived abroad, has been not too surprised. I'm like, if you put your product out there, people will find it interesting. And the world is big enough that even if only 1% watches, that's still 1% more than you ever had before. And so that's why I was always saying, hey, I wish the KBO teams would sell more of their gear abroad. I'm glad this has finally brought that to a point where they have now a store in the English language, and you can pay in your own currency and get it shipped. It might take a while due to COVID again, but you can still get your NC Dinos hat if that's what you want. There is now a social media page in English for the KBO League. Never thought I'd see that happen in my lifetime. I mean, the only reason I made my site 20 years ago was because there was no English language website. And the only reason the English language website initially started up by the KBO, it was forced by the league, by the government. The Korean government said, we need all our pro sports leagues to have English league websites. And so basically they were put pressure on by the government. And about 6 years ago, 2013, 2012 is when they came about. So it's been just recent that they've had an English language website. But now, because of the pandemic, they realized they have a global audience watching. So they had to upgrade and they have an Instagram account. They have a Facebook account. They have a Twitter account that's posting stuff up in the English language, which I think is awesome. And like I said, even if the league was to only get 1% interest from around the world, that's still 1% of interest that you never had before. And so I think it's been nothing but great, at least globally, for the league. Obviously, it's very horrible that they don't have fans in the stand and stuff for the teams itself. But I think just the fact that they're getting their name out, and then for the players themselves, their names are being known across the world. And it's really helping probably their stock rise amongst MLB scouts. I actually talked to one and they're like, yeah, you got some prospects. They're like, I don't have to go fishing for content anymore. I don't have to just come to your website. I can turn on the TV and they're talking about Sungbum Na. They're talking about Ha-Sung Kim. These are all prospects that could be playing in the major leagues in 2021. Yeah. And they don't have to do that as much legwork because they're just on the TV. And the bad part is the scout that I talked to said, now the rest of the league the rest of the major leagues knows about this player too, if they didn't already. So it's just like a twofold. And I say that's a good thing for the Korean player himself. That's that he's getting being able to market himself to a global audience, which has been one of the big, most positive things that has come out of the pandemic.
And a lot of this kind of stemmed from the fact that the KBO was just one of the first leagues in all of sports in the world to come back. So my question is, do you think that ESPN's going to renew this contract and keep it going in the future and now have that late night sports? Or is it just like a temporary thing because we were all craving sports so desperately?
That's a question that I've been pondering myself. So I have no allegiance to the league, KBO League. I have no allegiance to ESPN. But if I were to be a prognosticator now in September, the very end of September, is the KBO going to be on ESPN next year? Now, assuming we're back to, quote, normal, fans in the stands at sports leagues across America, I do not think that it will be shown on TV like it is now. If they were to keep the KBO property, ESPN himself, I could see it being like an online, hey, join our ESPN3 or their app or something online only. Maybe not putting as much resources with broadcasting, might just be carrying the Korean broadcast itself, but maybe just an option. Because to me, it only makes sense if you're the worldwide sports leader, why not have live sports on around the world, around the clock, if you can? So, I mean, I've talked to baseball fans they're like, this is awesome now that Major League's back. They're like, I can wake up, drink coffee, watch Korean baseball, It ends. I'm eating lunch. Major League Baseball's coming on. I can watch then the evening game. It ends. I go to sleep. I wake up. I do this again. I was like, as a sports fan, that is a dream. And that only makes sense. And not even just for the KBO. I would think if I was the sports leader, it might cost a little bit more, but why not get every sport that's being played across the world and somehow incorporate it into your platform? Give people the chance to watch Japanese baseball, Korean basketball, Vietnamese soccer league. I mean, I don't know what you could do. I mean, there's sports basically being played at any time of the world. You can go to the European leagues. You can watch European League hockey. You could do, I mean, again, ESPN would have to dish out some money, I'm sure, but I mean, it only makes sense if you're the self-proclaimed worldwide sports leader.
Yeah.
Why not try to get sports on 24/7 from around the world? And I know they're trying to do that with their new ESPN3 that they have, and they try to have different leagues on. But I mean, like, keep on adding to that. I want to see more growth into that, because I mean, like, yeah, I can only take so much Yankee. I mean, I love MLB. I can only, even if they're talking about my Phillies, like, I can only take so much of that talk. I don't need hosts shouting at me and them fighting over, like, who should be starting on this week.
Right.
Like, okay, dude, we got it. You don't need to keep on screaming at me, Stephen A. I understand what's happening. Let's just watch some other sports, because if I want that, I can tune into that. Or don't put it on the TV, but just give the fans that access.
Exactly.
So basically, before this ESPN access, or say ESPN doesn't even carry it next year, there is a way to watch games currently through Naver, but there are some workarounds. It's not as easy as just turning on a TV. You have to do a VPN, then you have to set your website up, then you have to be able to at least be able to read Korean or use Google Translate for the webpage. It's not as easy as sitting down and going, I want to watch a baseball game. Click.
Right. You got to work for it.
I mean, yeah. If you're pretty much lazy like I am, you want it spoon-fed to you. So, I mean, like, I'm hoping that ESPN spoon-feeds the KBO personally again next year. Yeah. I don't know if it's going to be the same extent, but any extent would be better than if it were to just shut it off for the league itself, and say, hey, we had a great run in 2020. Sorry, we're not doing it in 2021. I have, all these fans that they made across the world, all of a sudden they're going to be like coming to me going, how could I watch the game? And I'll tell them, but it's not going to have quite the same impact as it does being on a worldwide sports broad platform. Right.
So, and you also mentioned, like, you saw an increase in visitors to your website from different countries. Yeah. You don't have to get specific about numbers, but how substantial of an increase in site traffic did you get? And also, like, Twitter followers, like, how big of a jump are we talking here?
Site traffic, 25 times the amount that we normally have on KBO opening day. Thus why the website crashed on KBO opening day. Twitter followers, I had probably an increase of 15,000 just like that within the first week. And I've been shocked, and it's been, people are going on to new sports, and that's fine. Yeah. I expect that. But the funny thing is, I expected I expected less people to still be tuning in, basically. So, the decrease hasn't been as much as I thought, especially with NFL coming back and soccer leagues coming back, baseball coming back, NBA playoffs. I mean, right now, every sport's being played. It's been amazing as a sports fan. I mean, there's a North American sports fan, there's sports everywhere. Everything is on right now, which has never happened before due to, obviously pandemic, new times. But honestly, I've seen a drop in traffic. Yes, there's been naturally a drop in traffic and interest, but not near as many. It's not been a cliff. Basically, it's just been steadily going down.
Still
and I'm
above what it was before.
Oh wait, still way above than what it was before. And from what just a few interactions that I've had with random fans, they said, well, I ended up wanting to just watch it for betting reasons or sports reasons, or I'm just whatever. But now I actually like the league, or I bought into this team, so I need to see how they finish. So I'm still watching, or I like waking up in the morning and watching sports. Right. I don't need to watch the 9th rerun of Sports Center. I already know what happened last night. It's 2020. I have the internet.
Yeah.
So they're like, I like watching live sports on my 55-inch TV at home or something. I mean, like that, and that's more to the reason why I'm hoping and praying, whether it's ESPN or any other sports platform here in North America or the Western world, gives more precedence to those pro sports leagues around the world, because there's going to be fans, whether you think there is or not. You're going to find a fan. And I mean, whether it's fantasy baseball players, fantasy sports players, people betting on the games, or just generally people that want to drink coffee and watch sports, They're out there. And that's what truly shocked me about this, because I
Right.
honestly never thought that the typical American fan would be into the KBO. Honestly, a little
Hmm.
more pessimistic. And all of a sudden,
Yeah.
it's been a nice surprise to see people like, I'm still watching the KBO. It's September. What here? It's the very end of September. We're going into the fall. Major League
Hmm.
Baseball's on NFL, but I'm still tuning in. And I'm like, that is awesome. I hope you keep still tuning in and
Yeah.
even do that next season. So, I
Right.
mean, it's going to be very interesting to see how that plays out. But my fingers crossed. I hope that it works out for the best for everybody.
One other kind of trend, and I'm sure you've noticed this, is like just living in America, just kind of like the slow decline in popularity of baseball here in the States. And it's been pretty steady. I mean, other sports are kind of creeping up. The MLS, NHL are kind of
Yep.
passing the MLB. And, we see the empty seats in the stands, and there's all these jokes about how, oh, it's like a normal day for the Marlins here in,
Yep.
during the coronavirus. So, but then, on the other side of the world, you have what looks to be, at least from an American perspective, it's surging in popularity
Sure.
relative to what we're seeing in the MLB. So, there's different, I'm sure there's a lot of different explanations for that. The fan experience is completely different. The unwritten rules are completely different. There seems to be more of an embrace of, just like having fun with the game rather than being strictly professional. So what do you think it will take to change American baseball to kind of bring back those young viewers to
Sure.
fill the stands once again? And I know that's a problem that probably seems impossible to solve because they would have solved it
Sure.
already. But what are your thoughts on that?
Well, the way that I see it, as a fan myself that lives in the United States, grew up watching Major League Baseball, it is sad to see that fans are not tuning into baseball like they used to. And whether they're alienated or it's boring or they just got too much stuff going on, or they're like, why are these players not being marketed? Why do we not have why is Mike Trout, the best player in baseball, not being marketed like LeBron James? Stuff like that. I don't know the scientific answer, but I think you touched on it. Is there a correlation between fun and interest? Because if you were to look at every other baseball league outside of Major League Baseball, whether you're talking about Korea, whether you're talking about the Dominican winter leagues, Mexican leagues, CPBL in Taiwan, Japan, wherever baseball is being played outside of North America, they seem to be having a fun time, not just only in the stands, they also seem to have a fun time on the field as well. They still take it seriously, but they seem to be enjoying themselves. In the KBO specifically, they flip bats, they show some flair and exuberance, and they don't get hit by a pitch. So I don't know if that's I'm just putting it out there. I don't know if it's a direct correlation, but you see all these other leagues having fun everywhere within baseball, and they seem to be increasing in fans or having a fun time. You come over to a Major League Baseball stadium, the games are dead until it's your league, or you got the Cubs winning a World Series for the first time in 100 years. Or you're only cared about what's happening on the phone, and then all of a sudden, oh, we're at a home run. All right, I'm leaving. It's the sixth inning. I'm going home. Versus Asia, they stay until the ninth inning, whether you're winning or losing. You got players that are getting thrown at here in the United States because, like Tim Anderson, you like to have a fun time. You hit a home run, and you can't do this. You can't look at the ball. Like, of course you act like you've been there before. Well, I wanted to watch the ball. No, you can't do that. You have to play by our rules. You have guys that are coming from the Dominican. You're coming from Latin America that are then being told you can't do this. Fernando Tatis Jr., one of the most exciting prospects in baseball, being like, you know what, you shouldn't do that. It's too late in the game. You're running up the score. I'm sorry. These are professional adult men that should not have to worry about other people's feelings being hurt, because their job is to score. So if you get hurt, then you got to score more. So I mean,
Exactly.
and you're trying to tell another player from another culture to be like, no, don't do it that way. This is how we do it here. Yes, to an extent, there's some of that. I understand. This is
Right.
how yes, to assimilate. Yes, some of it,
Right.
but you shouldn't have to take the fun out of the game to
Yeah.
have to assimilate.
Right.
So yes, assimilate, but take the fun out. So one guy that I think of is Yasiel Puig. I mean, that I'm a Puig fan. He played for the Dodgers, and now he's a free agent. And but everything about him was like, oh, he's wild. He doesn't listen. He's a wild stallion. He needs to fit into our baseball world.
Yeah.
But you know what? When he wasn't fitting in was when I loved it. He was
Yeah.
pimping home runs. He flew
Yep.
out. Oh, haha. He flipped a bat on a pop out. Who
Yeah.
cares? Yeah, you still got
It's
the other
fun.
team got the out. Who cares? When people were talking about that, it's just been interesting to see how that was a bigger issue because he was doing stuff his way, not the major league way. And then it became not even, I don't know if it's controversial, but it became like, oh, he's not a good teammate. We don't need this talk. We don't need this stuff. Well, now I think 2020, I hope, except the Fernando Tatis Jr. thing that happened earlier, I was like, oh, because I thought baseball was maybe going to start doing a little bit better because basically for the longest time they hated bat flips. Now all of a sudden you got Cut 4, you got their Major League Baseball social media going, here's the top bat flips from the year. It's like embracing it. And I think they see it as themselves. They need to start embracing this and doing stuff. So maybe the league, the organization of Major League Baseball understands it, but it's going to have to take the players themselves might have to take a slow look at themselves and going, you know what? We need to embrace the difference in the culture in it. So the biggest thing that I ever hear from foreign baseball players are going from North America or the Dominican or wherever they're growing up, and then they get signed to play in Korea, is they have to assimilate to the way the Korean baseball game's being played. Pitchers have to hey, if you hit somebody, you got to take off your hat and bow, or you can't throw at somebody because they pimped a home run. They see it as a honor to have been signed to play in Korea. They aren't playing in North America. They're playing in Korea. So yes. Mm-hmm. And so I understand that when you come to Major League Baseball, yes, these guys are playing in Major League Baseball, but you happen to see that your sport's basically dying. You're getting no interest. Well, what's one reason why? I don't know. Maybe try not to stifle out the fun and just see what happens.
Right.
But it's going to take a whole culture change of that trying to grow up, literally a culture change.
Right.
The American culture of baseball does not seem to be embracing it as fast as some of the other countries. So I don't know if we just as an American baseball fandom have to just start saying, hey guys, ease up. It's pretty cool. It's fine if they pimp their home runs. We as fans don't get mad, so maybe you guys shouldn't either. Or hey, they scored or they tried to steal a base and they're up by 8 runs. It's okay. I don't know, and I think that has crushed out some of the interest in the youth in baseball here in North America, at least. Even for myself, it's kind of okay, I watch way more KBO now than I do MLB. I'll watch the Phillies a little bit. Now I just watch more KBO just because, you know what? KBO, it might not be the same talent level, but it's an enjoyable game for me. It's fun. It's exciting. You never know what's happening. And for that same reason, because the bullpens are terrible on some teams, you're I can't turn it off because I don't know if a 9-run lead is safe. So that's why I'm still watching. So honest to God, that's why I do it. Whereas in major leagues, for the most part, unless it's my Phillies this year, if you have a 3-4 run lead, you're got a pretty good chance at winning the game. Mm-hmm. KBO, you never know, and that's why fans stay till the end cheering because you never know. Yeah, it's not the same quality, but at the same time, it's still baseball. It's a fun brand. It's fun. It's fun, exciting, and I hopefully something happens here in Major League Baseball so that we're talking about it 10 years down the road and going, hey, Major League Baseball's changed. It is up there with NFL numbers. People are coming to games in flocks. They're having fun. We're not telling them what to do because, look what NFL happened. They used to say no dancing after a touchdown. They happened to change that a few years ago, right? Show a little more personality because that's what we want as a society. We want to see the players. We know what it looks like when they just drop the ball after they hit it. After they score a touchdown. We know what it looks like when you just cross the plate. Yeah, good job, home run. We know what that looks like. Let's see I want to see what you do when you're pumped up. Mike Trout, Tim Anderson, Fernando Tatis. I want to see you guys actually celebrate because we know what it's just like turning on the TV and hearing coach speak all the time, right? Well, it's controversial comments when somebody doesn't speak like a coach, but it is a way more fun interview to listen to, whether it's a fan or just as an analyst going, well, we didn't do what we were supposed to do today. Next time we'll go get them or something. It's just very boring and blah. I just love it when it's just hey, put it out there and let's see if people are interested.
Yeah. And I think You mentioned those two words, fun and exciting, like repeatedly. And it's like, I wonder how often that's said by someone who watches an MLB game on TV. A lot of people always say, like, oh, I love going to baseball games, but when I watch it on
Yep.
TV, it's just a snooze fest,
Yep.
but it's like the KBO games, especially when there's fans in the stands, it's something that's a better TV
Right.
product, it sounds like, than perhaps the MLB.
Sure. And now that might have to do with some, I mean, I'm not telling MLB guys to go out there and just blow leads and stuff like that. That's one of the reasons why you still watch a KBO game, and it's frustrating it is as a fan, but you actually have that, what if I don't know
Right,
what's going to happen kind of thing
right.
going on. But yes, that is a part with the KBO. It's honestly, my wife doesn't like watching baseball on TV, but she likes going to the games, especially KBO baseball games, because it's a lot more interesting with the atmosphere. But
Right.
with Major League Baseball, there's no way she is watching it on TV. She's like, "What are they talking about? Whatever, just turn it off." She'll watch a football game, basketball game, but not baseball.
Right.
Um, and hopefully, I don't know what we have to do to change that so that it is exciting, so people are like, I want to tune in, and not just during playoffs. Playoff baseball is fun no matter what, no
Mhm.
matter who's your team. And for me, but how can we have that same amount of fun and excitement during the regular season?
Yeah, exactly. And then I always ask this as the last question for all my guests. Based on the current trajectory, where do you think the KBO and baseball in general in Korea will be in the next 10 years? Can it grow any more than it already has? Or what are the next steps? What are the KBO's goals as a league and as a governing body, like in terms of growing the game itself? Do they feel like they've kind of peaked? Or is it about sustaining, or is it about kind of growing even more and trying to make this, really blow up?
As a league, with the team, talking about the teams and players, not organization wise, I was a little worried there for a while that it had plateaued, it had peaked, and up until this season, and now with the pandemic, I was even more afraid because I thought fan interest might not be there. But then once they got the TV deal done with ESPN, and Korea is always looking at how they're viewed from the outside, and they realize that people are watching their league from the outside. It got a lot of media play in Korea that ESPN's watching us. Um, there's interest back into league, and I think next year, at least, if fans, assuming this is all on the assumption that we got COVID pandemic done, who knows what the next major thing will be, but COVID is done. I think the fans will return to stadiums in droves, and that's not even just in the KBO. I think that's going to be worldwide, just because we always took sports for granted as a luxury, and that's truly what it is for us. We're blessed enough to be like, hey, I have a pro sports league. I don't have to worry about, other more, some people are not fortunate enough to worry about. I'm fortunate enough to sit here and be like, I can sit down and I can go watch a baseball game, or I can go attend and watch a Mariners game, or go where I am, go see a Seahawks game or something like that. I am fortunate enough to do that, and I'm going to want to do that when I'm able to. And so I think if, the COVID-19 is eradicated, or not even, just not, we found a vaccine and stuff like that, I think the KBO League will find themselves at another high again, at least attendance wise. Now, the challenge to the league themselves is going to be able to keep that high, that buzz around the KBO, because, like I said, there's always other stuff to do in Korea. And if COVID-19 is out of the way, that means all that other stuff has now a focus on it too. You can travel again. You can travel abroad. You can go anywhere you want. They're going to have to compete. And so the way that you compete is by not just doing the same thing over and over and over like you've been doing. You're going to have to maybe, like we touched on it, invest in your local schools, invest in your local baseball infrastructure so that you can get these young players. Start promoting these players, start promoting the school, start promoting the game of baseball, make it more accessible to other people to play so that it's as a leisure sport, so that you got that interest, so that it's always there, and so that you have a built-in fan down the road. Because I played baseball when I'm a young kid, now I want to watch baseball. You
Right.
If you start doing more of that, I don't think the league's going to have to worry about league interest dropping off in Korea itself. Now, if they don't do any of that, you might have to worry about other leagues taking over from where you're at, and they're going to be like, well, look, they didn't they didn't capitalize on it. Let's do it. What can we do? And so I think the KBO knows what they need to do, because they know they do not want to go down to those like 2,000 fans a game numbers again. They want to keep it up to 10,000. They built these brand new stadiums that can hold 20,000 fans, and it looks really bad when only 1,000 show up, pre-COVID. And so they're really going to try their hardest to make sure that happens. And I think the way that the baseball organization in Korea is, as they get younger and younger. Now I'm 40, so if they get somebody younger than I am, just generally forward thinking, thinks outside the box, doesn't do stuff just the same old way. It's not an old boys club, I think if they start doing more of that, then the future has a bright future for the league is very bright. And I've seen some of those things happen. So I'm hoping that's what happens. In 10 years from now, we're talking about the KBO and going, wow, they're right. They're still right where they are. They're still one of the top leagues. And hey, it's being shown on ESPN5 tonight.
Awesome. Wow. Well, I said there's a lot of expectations. You blew them all away. You exceeded them all. So I just want to thank you again so much for your time. And I know I went a little bit over what I said, but I just really appreciate it. Kamsahamnida.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thank you for having me on. If you ever need anything else, just reach out. Let me know. Hopefully I was able to answer some questions.
Well, once again, I want to thank Dan for taking the time out of his very busy schedule to do this episode with me. It was just fantastic stuff, very insightful. And again, you can find him at MyKBO on Twitter. My name is Zach Mason. This has been Growing the Game. You can give me a follow at Zach Mason Sports, or if you want to support this podcast, you can throw a small donation at buymeacoffee.com/growing the game. Each episode takes about 15 to 20 hours to produce, and I've made it a point for each show to be free of ads. So any contribution helps out a lot in producing this podcast. Thanks again for tuning in. I'll see you all soon.